In one sentence, tell us one thing that would help us understand what you're thinking about performing arts and transforming place as we begin the day. So think about that for a minute. We are here, as the chairman said, really to help to develop a better understanding of performance-based organizations and artists as they engage in transforming places through practice. And we represent a great and wide, diverse look at those practices around the country. The intent is really to broaden knowledge, to share knowledge, to create exchange, so that's for us as stakeholders. It's for policy folks who are just listening as they're thinking, and yet this is not a policy discussion. We do not have outcomes that we are driving for today. It's really to open up the conversation. The NEA and ArtPlace are here as, this is an NEA meeting. There's sponsorship and support from ArtPlace, and we're glad to have Jamie here at the table with us. But we are really working to begin the conversation. We're joined by folks outside around this notion of beyond the building, performing arts and transforming place. And you'll notice that creative placemaking is not explicitly in that title. We are not here to talk only about the relationship to creative placemaking as it may have been formally defined, but really to open up the broader conversation in this notion of transforming. But we're going to really move in rapid fire. So it's really, I'm Colleen, I'm from Arizona, and this is one thing that you should know that's on my mind today. And you can just say that sentence. Are you really ready? Because we need to get this rolling. Good? All right. I'm Colleen. There you go.
Okay, is that good? All right, I'm Colleen Jennings-Rogensack, the Executive Director of Arizona State University's GAMAGE. And today, for me and for the work we're doing at GAMAGE, which has turned 50 years old this year, our mission is connecting communities. We believe in the plural, because inside every community, there's a plurality of communities. We also believe that the arts help us to do that, the arts and what we also call ritualized cultural expression, because we live in a state which has 49 First Nations peoples. We live in a state that is 65% Latino. We live in a state that is filled with lots of different kind of communities. So I'm hoping to hear from everyone today is that notion of the plurality of community, deeply and profoundly serving them without being everything to everyone.
Thank you. Who's up? Oh, come on.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Jason.
I guess I have to. Hi, Jason Schubach from the National Endowment for the Arts. I am just, where my head is at and what I'm really excited about today is to hear from all of you, to learn from all of you about where performance intersects with transforming people's lives and places. One sentence, boom.
All right, very good. There it is. We're going to move quickly. MK, can you go?
I'm MK Wegman with the National Performance Network, Visual Artists Network, and we're based in New Orleans. And I would speak from the perspective of how artists are actively embedded in communities, transforming the lives of the people that they intersect with, and addressing serious issues in our country and in our world.
I'm Sarah Wilkie. I'm from On the Boards in Seattle, Washington. And I think I want to make sure in the conversation today that as we talk about performance, it's not about single events, but it's about the aggregate of the impact of all of the work that we do in long-term relationships.
My name's Claudia Alec. I'm from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And I think that right now I'm really interested in communities doing large expressions of inclusion that are very entertaining.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Michael Orlov with the National Endowment for the Arts. Similar to Jason and perhaps my other NEA colleagues here, as an observer to hear your observations, which has been really great to read over the weekend for all of us to listen to and perhaps bring disparate communities and voices together.
I'm Mark Skorka, president of Opera America, based at the National Opera Center in New York. And this is really an interesting topic in its portability of singers and its flexibility in terms of story can really connect with communities in remarkable ways. And I want to make sure that we are part of the dialogue both in a reciprocal way.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
My name is Cookie Ruiz. Good morning from Ballet Austin. As a ballet company representing the work of Stephen Mills as a producing choreographer, we are very interested in what happens when art holds the potential to engage communities in difficult conversations that have the potential to result in transformational change. So we don't have the answers, but we're very interested in that place. Susan Fader, Program Officer for the newly constituted Arts and Cultural Heritage Program at the Mellon Foundation and a proud member of the Art Place Operations Committee since its inception in 2010. My work on that, with that initiative has caused me to become very sensitive to the role of arts and the role of performing arts organizations who sometimes feel marginalized, I think possibly because of different vocabularies around community engagement and placemaking, and I'm very interested to explore those intersections and help performing arts organizations not feel that they are not part of this conversation, don't have contributions.
Excellent. Thank you. I think you get at the timing of this and why it's important. Please.
My name is Sandra Bernhardt. I'm with Houston Grand Opera and director of HGO Co., which stands for Company, Community, define opera at Houston Grand Opera. We do that through community conversations, commissions, and education for all ages, but we are also looking for a further dialogue with arts partners, as always, to see what the movement is and the vocabulary is.
Great, thank you.
I'm Jamie Bennett from Art Place America, and I'm an NEA alum, so it is nice to be back home. And I'm thinking a lot about the Fortress of Solitude, which I just saw at the Public Theater, and sort of the relationship between music, or the relationships among music, individual transformation, social transformation, and the transformation of a place.
I'm Mitch Menchaca with Chorus America and have worn many hats in my career, hailing from the great state of Arizona. What I am interested in this conversation is about clarity. This isn't new work. It's a new acronym, new titles on community arts development. So what is new, what is refreshed in this work, and maybe clarity of language around placemaking and the term community, as both of those are very loaded for visual artists, performing artists, and general people who live in our communities.
Good morning. My name is Carlton Turner. I'm the executive director of Alternate Roots in Atlanta, Georgia, and I hail from the great state of Mississippi, Utica, rural Mississippi to be exact. And I'm really excited about this conversation and building on what Mitch said. You know, thinking about this is something that is not new, and part of what I would like to make sure that happens in this space is that we do acknowledge the work that has happened in communities for many decades to support this types of initiative before the name became something of, you know, of a used wide world, you know, across our field, that there was work happening before it was named by outsiders. And so to really acknowledge that space and hold it up in this conversation so that we can understand where we're going by visiting where we've been.
Teresa Eyring, Executive Director of Theater Communications Group. We are based in New York and a national organization for theater in the US and beyond. Also, I would like to hold up this idea that our sector has evolved enormously over the decades, and it's amazing to be sitting here with this group and having a conversation about work outside buildings and creative placemaking. This work has been happening for a long time, so in a way I think we are together catching the wave and helping to carry it forward.
This is Sixto Logan, the director for the Center for Arts Leadership at the University of Houston. And I'm also very interested on how are we actually validating the knowledge that is already existing in the communities? What is that expertise? And also how the arts and culture sector can actually be learning from the other sectors and who've been doing this for decades.
I'm Ashley Sparks. I'm with the Network of Ensemble Theater. I'm also a practitioner, and I work with Cornerstone Theater Company in Los Angeles and Pearl d'Amour, which is a performance company. And I think I'm most interested right now in how practitioners are understanding tools for translation of working across sector, and also coming from ensembles where this ensemble practice is actually part of what communities have been doing for a long time. It's just not the language that they've been using. Hi, my name's Amy Fitterer. I'm the executive director of Dance USA, based in Washington, D.C. I'm very interested in also acknowledging the past. I think that a movement-based art form like dance is a wonderful way of crossing different boundaries, both inside and outside of a building. And I think that there's been a lot of great work that's already happened in many different dance genres, and I'd like to see those honored, as well as moving forward to see what we exactly mean by community.
I'm Howard Herring. I'm president of New World Symphony. We're actually an orchestral academy. We also see ourselves as a laboratory for generating new ideas about the way music is taught, and presented, and experienced. I hope that some of what we've done can be helpful to all of us in this room. I also can tell you that we have transformed Miami Beach twice and now Miami once. So we feel like we know a little bit about how to go about it.
I'm Jesse Rosen from the League of American Orchestras, and I think this work in orchestras is it's early days for us. I mean, there's a lot of community activity going on. It means very different things to different organizations, and I think it would be really helpful for us to begin to learn from other organizations for whom this work has been more organic and been going on for some time.
I'm Adam Skloot, Artistic Director of Ballet West. We're based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I think for me, I'm really intrigued to learn how different arts organizations collaborate together. We have a lot of different top-level arts organizations in Salt Lake City, but we tend to work not all together, and so I'm hoping to find more ways of connecting our work.
I'm Noah Spiegel. I'm the COO at Nashville Opera. One of the things that I'm most interested in is sustainability of the art form that we work in, and maintaining relevancy as our community continues to change complexion, and studying the demographics and where our communities are going, so that we can create pathways for young people to understand that the classic arts and arts in general are places that they belong in the future.
Hi, I'm Doug Sontag. I'm the Director of Performing Arts here at the National Endowment for the Arts. And if Jamie's an alum, I'm a vet. So I do want to just reinforce the notion of vocabulary. I've had the opportunity the past year to oversee all of the performing arts disciplines. And they are all saying the same things. They're just saying it with different words, even within the performing arts. And so I want to make sure that we get a collection of synonyms so we understand each other.
Thank you. Mario.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mario Garcia Durham. I'm the president of the Association of Performing Arts Presenters. Thanks to the NEA for this gathering. I think it's really important to keep this conversation going. This is about performing arts organizations and transforming place. I think it's important as well to keep in mind that that in transforming place, there's an assumption that there are places that need to be transformed for various reasons. And I think it's important for us as arts organizations to recognize that the transformation of place doesn't necessarily fall within just the performing arts, that we're part of greater communities that are all dealing with transforming place in their own ways. So I think it's important to realize that we're not alone, we're not a silo, that we are working in our communities, or we should be working in our communities with other sectors outside of the arts specifically to take on these great challenges.
I'm Dan Lurie, Director of Strategic Partnerships at NEA. Here to support Jason and the team, but also to really listen to the conversation and where appropriate, share where this administration is doing around collaboration among agencies and collaboration among sectors.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It was, first of all, great to hear you get that one thought out. And in accumulation, much of what we saw in the responses to the surveys come on the table, even in those one-sentence remarks. We want to recall the traditions, many from different places, that come into this work, and the way that we have done it, and the ways that we have labeled it or called it in other points in time, so that we don't think that we're beginning new. So we're acknowledging the past. There were a lot of comments that relate to how this work needs to be done in relationship with other arts organizations in our communities, and not necessarily individually as organizations. And Mario's comment to the fact that the work that we're trying to accomplish is trying to be accomplished with others in the community that care and that are equally trying to make change and transformation. And I know that we have some exceptional examples of that in the room. We are reminded to think about artists living and working in communities as a foundational building block of the work that we're talking about. And I really appreciate that Jesse calls out that in orchestras, maybe this is newer work for some than it might be in other parts of the performing arts disciplines. And I really appreciate that you called that out. You've also gotten experience actually using your mics, turning them on, turning them off, and you got good at it. And that was a part of the intent of this exercise. So now you all know how to do that. And we're doing really well on time. I want to welcome Maria Rosario Jackson, who's in space with us now, and whose work I call on a great deal. When I am thinking about these. It ties into things that have not gone completely under this, but cultural vitality and indicators, and a lot of work thinking about this from a perspective of urban planning, community revitalization, and so on. We're doing really well on time. One of the unfortunate stories here is that Michael Road is not with us, at least yet, this morning. He had some difficulty this morning. He is tending to it and hopes very much to join us, but we don't know if we expect him today. So we will not be starting with a snapshot. We will be going more quickly into our morning presentations. First, I just want to make a couple comments about our conversation. We're all invested in this conversation being both one that has depth and also that has good participation. So we just also experienced that we can get it down to 1 or 2 sentences. So I'm going to just ask for a few general agreements as we go on. That you try to be succinct, that although they won't see it in the Twitter sphere, if you agree with someone, it's okay to just nod. Some air dittos is good. You don't have to repeat it and say it again. Let us know that you agree so that we can keep the flow going. Check yourself in terms of participation. If you are participating well, if you're not really speaking up. Some people are quieter, and that's why we can grab notes, and that's why we have smaller conversations and not just a conversation around the big table all day. But I will and hope that you'll work with me to look around and make sure that people that are trying to get on the table do, and ask you to check yourself if we're hearing a lot from you and we should hear from other folks. So I appreciate if you would. I also would encourage that it's really okay and to challenge ideas that come up, and to be willing to put some ideas on the table, just to do it respectfully and to speak for yourself, and to be careful not to generalize too much. And so I think if we can just agree to those kinds of basics, we'll be in great shape for a good conversation. So just to review the agenda, we are shortly going into hear our first 3 presentations of summary findings from your surveys that will help us look at the question of when is performance create placemaking. And we will have very brief presentations. You all have the summaries, and they're available online for those of you who are joining us online. We'll have enough time after those presentations to capture some comments here in the room, and then we'll be breaking out so that you'll have about 40 minutes of conversation, and you've been assigned rooms and groups and questions that you'll be taking up today. So that's how that'll work. We're going to do that twice. And in between, We are going to have a few snapshots that give us a chance to look at the work on the ground. And that was the other thing that I appreciated. Jamie got us started with just remembering to imagine what the work looks like on the ground. I'm from Western Massachusetts, so Double Edge Theater is in my backyard. And Double Edge is a good organization to bring up at this table because they're at many tables. They're doing creative placemaking through performance making very much, and they have generally fallen through the cracks of most of the programs out there to support that work. So they give me my laboratory to kind of try to understand how are things fitting together? Why is this a fit, not a fit? What's going on in that story of Double Edge? So it's one of the stories that I bring to the table as well. And let's see. We're in good shape. The only other thing I want to say is that these summaries are just that. So I might have captured some of your best comments. I might have shortened them a little bit or changed them. I hope I tried not to change anything. We did not put in the summaries because of length the stories and the examples that were rich and full in those papers, and we will capture those for our longer reporting. And I hope that they'll come on the table. And that's the last thing that I would urge, is that as you're speaking, it's great to put example forward and to help us understand from story how we can talk about this work. So we are a little ahead of schedule. Is that possible? It might be. I don't think I ever thought we'd really go around the table like that. But if we're ready, is there any reason we can't advance and go for it and capture time for later in the day? So that's great, because it does give us time to see where our conversations want to go later on. So with that, we're going to start with 3 presentations this morning from our folks who were volunteered to step up. And the questions that we're going to be taking up this morning under the frame of when is performance placemaking are around language. What does creative placemaking mean to your organization? And I want to emphasize, especially for those listening, that all of our participants here in the room were asked to speak directly from their experience in their organization and with the organizations that they represent as service organizations. And so we really are tapping this not as a philosophical discussion, but this is what comes out of our work and where we are with our work today. Important. How has your organization framed creative placemaking, and what other terms and language has been used? Our second question, place and mission. We actually combined 2 of our survey questions in this category. So we're looking at how the work of organizations is really relating to place and communities in which it's situated. We're looking at the ways that groups have engaged in creative placemaking strategies as they define them. And we're looking at how this has been tied also to broader environmental and social strategies. And finally, we're going to talk about events, because in the performing arts, one of the sticky points is how temporary work, how work that is more ephemeral, how work that happens big but once or twice or 3 times has the kind of impact that other kinds of transformational change might have, that has more structure to it, that has more place. So this is a really important conversation around this table, and folks were very generous in their comments. So how contemporary performance events transform and imbue lasting meaning and change with particular spaces and communities. And I should also say, we had no trouble answering this question. So there's a lot that needs to be put on the table about how the performing arts work in that way. So those are our 3 this morning. We're going to ask our presenters to come and share their look at those summaries with you, and then we'll take a few minutes after each right away to just bring onto the table any additional observations that you want to make, comments, or even a question, and then we'll move on in fairly good succession. We have a little bit more time to play with that just a little bit today. So we will probably add a minute or two to our discussion points around each of the three. And that puts Colleen, generous Colleen Jennings Roggensack from Arizona, up first. I'm going to get out of your way, and you'll use this. All right.
Thank you, Barbara. Question, what does creative placemaking mean to your organization? And since it's a multiple question, I will just deal with the first one. In terms of all of our summaries, in all the cases, our colleagues around this table have found creative placemaking an important part of their organization. Having said that, some organizations are deeply embedded in it, and other organizations are in the process of beginning to look at it. Many of the organizations, both public and private, and some are a shared combination of both. Creative placemaking is reason for the founding and establishment of several of the organizations, and for many organizations, it is the guiding principle. Creative placemaking is the mission and core value or parts of the goals as a result of current strategic planning. Creative placemaking has been viewed as one of many efforts to remove barriers to participation. Creative placemaking is a way to reach beyond the walls of the building and not to get stuck in. It means connecting communities and providing an experience. Now, the second part, has your organization treated or framed the issues of creative placemaking in other terms or other languages? Again, while all of our colleagues around the table find meaning in creative placemaking, the actualization of the meaning is differently titled, differently labeled, and different processes are involved. Creative placemaking is viewed as part of the daily dialogue on community relevance, access, network, and infrastructure. It's increasing civic impact, building real value or perceived value in communities, and strengthening relationships with arts and non-arts organizations. Creative placemaking is an audience engagement and community development. And those two words, engagement and development, is featured throughout all of the input that we have received. The other word is one of authenticity. And I think, since I'm allowed to put some input along the way, it's one of the things that we should add to our discussion today, the notion of authenticity and what that actually means. Again, engagement, audience, and community served is often featured in all of these presentations. Public service and artistic expression combined is one of the thoughts that came out, connecting communities. The notion that we are creating experiences and lasting impact was, again, something that everyone had in common. The integration of artistic expression and public service, again, the word public service. Arts-based partnerships, place, public, good equity, coalition building, problem solving, access with a capital A. That was really important for everyone at the table. Opportunities, providing opportunities both inside the community and opportunities for artists. And there's a notion of in communities working with artists who are from the communities that you serve and artists who are not of those communities coming in to help serve your communities. Artists contributing to the place where they live and they work, and presenters are embedded in their community. So there is that notion that artists already are of communities in various communities where they are living and working, and that presenters embedded in those communities are of those communities. So it's not a distance situation. Creative placemaking, a culture of creativity to engage a community in call and response dialogue, to actively listen to each other, study collective stories, develop a critical analysis of our current and historic place design, and implement sensible, sustainable solutions developed by those most effective. And I actually read that word from word. It's Carlton's words, and I thought it most adequately summed up the question we put in front. The concern that creative placemaking has been done in an authentic manner, and that we have been operating that way for quite some time. So it begs the question, why the new name, and what is its purpose? And is it different
from what we have been doing? And is the outcome different from the outcomes that we've been expecting? There's a notion that there is a trend of creating a rubric of words, and so that we are forced to behave in an inauthentic manner in order to receive funding, whether that be public or private. So I think that has to be laid on the table as well. And the notion that creative placemaking is a commodity, not a deep-seated belief or a mission. And that are we, in a sense, just wearing a new set of clothes?
That was great. Thank you so much. And take a minute to take it in. Yeah. We're seeing emphasize or add to here. Comments. MK, thanks. MK is doing it. Yeah.
The thing that I would want to add is where the creative process comes in, because a lot of this conversation is about the performing arts in the moment of the public performance, and it doesn't. It's not taking into account how new work is made and how artists' ideas are responding to the issues of their communities, and they're making work out of their community relationships.
That's great. Really important. Ditto's there too. It's real underline. The points of and opportunities for engagement really begin in the creative process, and there was a lot of emphasis in the comments about the planning processes and the relationship building in the communities that become the platform for the activities and the creative connecting and transformation that happens. That work is there too and ongoing. Other kinds of comments. So we're talking about language. We're talking about definitions. Mark.
I think some of the language implies that we are seeking new audiences for what we already do in a product-focused way, as opposed to language that encourages artists and arts organizations to use their assets to respond to public priorities that may not be about our art form or our product. And I think some of what we're seeking, what I'm seeking, is the vocabulary that allows us to be in a reciprocal relationship, so that it's not all about us and our product and our performances, but it is about us as good citizens participating in strengthening our communities.
The civic institution, the cultural as a civic institution, very much appreciate that. Anything else you want to add at this point? Oh, Mitch, thanks.
And with the vocabulary, it's the identification of community. We, as organizations, used to be able to identify our community as a selection of artists. It's a neighborhood. And I think with placemaking, there has been a generalization that it is an entire geographical mass that you have to serve. And coming from Phoenix, which is 500 square miles, you can't serve 500 square miles in one organization or one art form. So the identification piece of what community is.
Important. Mario.
I just wanted to applaud the tone of the opening remarks. Often we come to meetings like this and there's a sense of holding back and not being frank and honest. And I really applaud you, Colleen, for starting us off on that tone of respect and honesty and openness to look at this issue. So thank you.
I think your comments also really underscored the breadth of approaches to thinking about the relationship of artist and institution to community in this room, because we have major cultural institutions, and those are air quotes, not dittos, and we have folks that are closer to the ground. And what was most interesting to me was how close practice and connected practice is becoming between those kinds of groups and artists. So I think it feels forced in some cases, and even where practice has been deep, it's that we're asking questions about, do we have to fit or talk about our work this way when this is the authentic way that we think and do it? So we're really holding all of that. Any other last comments, please?
Well, I guess I've been thinking about how language reinforces the power dynamics and relationships in the communities, and how that where not only in relationship to communities, but between art organizations and artists and funders and among themselves, and then how are we actually making those explicit in these conversations?
I just wanted to mention one other additional comment off of Mark's comment. In the reciprocal agreement, oftentimes we use placemaking and transformation of communities, whereas we're really amplifying what communities are already saying and what they already believe in communities rather than transforming a place. And I'm very sensitive to that in Houston, which are a lot of dynamic communities that exist. And through reciprocal arrangement of collaboration and partnership, we're amplifying that voice, not transforming that community.
I just wanted to add on to that. I mean, I can't remember if this is where we should bring this up or not, but I just want to put on the table the Roberto Bedoya criticism of the placemaking language. I think everybody's familiar with this about the idea of it being more placekeeping, and if it wasn't it a place before, why does it need to be made? You know, that kind of. I mean, totally get it. You know, we've been paying a very close attention to that conversation. I think the amplified language kind of fits in that very well. Thank you.
Can anyone speak to the question that Colleen put on the table about the purpose and intent and origin of the idea of creative placemaking?
If it's helpful, I'm happy to weigh in from sort of my personal point of view. I don't think in any way I own that bit of the discussion. But like Susan and like Jason and like Dan, I was around often at the beginning. And what's interesting to me is that there's something in the origin myth around sort of the report Creative Placemaking that Ann Markison and Ann Gadwa Nicodemus did around the Art Town program at the NEA, around the establishment of Art Place, that people felt that the folks that were involved with that thought they were discovering something new. And from the beginning, what was interesting is that the conversations that I was part of talked about the fact that the work is literally as old as recorded history. So that if this were a visual arts convening, I would point to the caves of Lascaux and say that some of the earliest recorded history we have is of a community making images of their collective experiences and literally using those works of arts as the boundaries of that community. Since it's performing arts, maybe I'll only go back to ancient Greece, where the theater was the literal center of its community, the physical center, as well as the social, the civic, and the economic. The sort of two thoughts that I experienced in terms of putting a new name on an ancient practice. One was around, I was recently driving in Wisconsin, in Sauk County, Wisconsin. There's an amazing worm farm project where there are art installations and farm installations in a sort of 50-mile circuit. So I was in the car, and as someone who doesn't drive a lot, I got to listen to the radio, which was very exciting. But it was NPR Pledge Week, which was very disappointing because there was a lot of shilling. But Garrison Keillor talked about fundraising in a language that I've heard come up a lot around this table, which is that successful fundraising is an agreement between two entities that each has something the other needs. And so there was some aspect in creative placemaking in terms of wanting to make the case that not only do communities need to do something for arts organizations also do something for community. So there is a real exchange of value. So rather, my background is as a nonprofit fundraiser. So rather than the sort of beggar model of fundraising, I don't have something you do, can I have it? It was an emphasis towards saying, I've got something great, you've got something great, want to switch. It was sort of the stone soup model of fundraising. And I think the other bit of it, the second half of the impulses that I got to experience was around, if we don't have a name for it, there isn't a way to gather people who are doing it. So if you want to throw a party, you have to sort of have an invitation list. So how do we create a tent around people who are doing art with the intention of impacting a place in a way that folks can show up, learn from each other? Because one of the sort of truisms of local place-based work is that it is local and based in a place. And so I'm sitting in Brooklyn. I may not know what's going on in Trenton, let alone in Peoria, let alone in Boise, let alone in North Shore, California. So it was really meant to sort of be a change in the value proposition that everyone has something the other needs, as well as a sense of it's a way to gather us together who might not otherwise see our work as having something in common. So that's my personal take. In no way is that the definitive take, but that was my lived experience.
In our town. And I think to a degree, I would say that the creative placemaking term was also developed out of a sense of value in the sort of urban redevelopment, community redevelopment framework, because where it really has had legs. So, we may, as a field, be questioning lots of the dynamics of it, but it got us some more legs than we had in settings outside of the arts, economic, community development, offices of, how many offices now in cities have an office of new urban mechanics, who, as Boston does. So the idea of creativity in city making is happening, and that wave was sort of also beginning, and I think that it also moved, it did command attention in municipal government, with elected officials, with folks that were making decisions, resources, investments, and the programs were designed in effect to do that. And so the original promotion of the programs often started with, can you think of a place in your community where arts are making a change? And so that literal notion of physical place, I think, became a little bit prominent, more so than the way that we are talking and thinking and imagining today. Far more than that literal physical space, which I think was at the core of what was translated or taken in as perception. So it's a little addition. I'm going to take these two comments, and then we're going to move to the next presentation. So Teresa.
Yeah, my comment is quick. I know that there was a movement that was really just called placemaking before creative placemaking came about, and it really was about communities coming together to reimagine public spaces. So I think that, yeah, that's part of the evolution of the language as well.
Right. I mean, I came to the NEA and creative placemaking was already a thing. I came a little bit after. But that's really the point of today, and that's that other language that people are using to define it. I've already written down like 20 new terms. So that's great, and I think that's really the point of today, is to make sure that whatever the policy frame umbrella people end up using, that it's recognizing the work that's actually happening on the ground in an authentic way. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. I'm going to just make a couple of points I've been forgetting to ask you, and you've been forgetting to introduce yourselves each time you speak, so I'd appreciate it if you try to keep that in mind. And early on, I didn't say that the bathrooms are located back out that way and past the beautiful reception area, and then to your right. So take a break as you need to. So with that, I'm going to welcome Sarah. Sandra, I'm sorry. I'm looking through. I crossed your name out as we were going through the introductions. Sandra, to come up and talk with us about place and mission. Can you get by?
Hi, my name is Sandra Bernhardt, and again, I'm the director of HEO at Houston Grand Opera. So I thought the series of questions that I was to look at was very interesting, especially in response to the title of why we're all here, which is beyond the building. Mm-hmm. And this really begged the question about whether we are beyond the building. The questions were, how does the work of your organization relate to the place and community within which it's situated? In what ways have you engaged in creative placemaking strategies, and how might you see creative placemaking as a part of your organization's operational artistic missions or philosophy? Well, to articulate your company's mission or philosophy or vision or direction, That's a huge impact. And to see what we're doing as far as creative placemaking, or the number of words that we are using today as a part of a company's philosophy and mission, that's huge. I think from what I've read of the comments that came in, and I will read some of these comments to you, the companies fall under two really distinct categories: those who are involving themselves in civic actions and social responsibility, and those who are involved in the art action and who are creating art as the motive for what they do as a part of their mission and how they are serving this creative placemaking kind of entity. It does boil down to a lot of vocabulary, and I'm going to read to you some of the words that kept popping up over and over again, but were used in completely different kinds of sentences. They are arts as a cultural resource to the city in which you reside. That's something the Houston Grand Opera uses, a cultural resource as opposed to transformation or creative placemaking. Creative placemaker, creative economy, civic asset, civic footprint, fingerprint of our community, public value, something that I really enjoy reading, value added, placemaking, city resonance, transformation. It's a very interesting slew of words, and their meaning is vast. One of the things at Houston Grand Opera is we have not changed our mission and vision. This is work that has always been a part of what we have done. It's just what we've done is we've amplified a little more of our civic footprint in the city of Houston. Houston is dynamic, it's new, it has a lot of new communities, so we can look at Houston in a little bit different way than a lot of cities look at their communities. Where the communities are so new that they are being built as we speak, as opposed to communities embedded that are transforming or changing in other cities. What's interesting is looking at our company in relation to this. What we stand for as companies is very, very important. We are directed by our mission, but we can't lose our mission as far as what it is we are doing, why we're doing it, and for whom we are doing our work. And tucking in little words like the words I just read as a form of changing your mission vision, but not changing why you do what you work, your work, and who you do it for, is a little bit of a structural difference, and it is a little bit like blindly using vocabulary to either raise funds for what you're doing or marketing for trying to find a better or bigger audience. And one of the things that I wanted to say is Carlton Turner, we keep using your words to introduce good ideas. He writes, the product is important. The process of relationship building is essential. And what I want to say is that it is essential that we understand what our mission vision is in the communities in which we reside, so we can be a cultural resource to our community without changing what it is we do, what it is that we set out to do. Our core values at Houston Grand Opera are excellence, relevance, and accessibility. We are an opera company, so we define opera as telling stories with words and music. We create opera on our main stage, and we also commission operas to tell the stories through words and music of those who call Houston their home. That is the mission. That is the why we do what we do. We do it for those who will come see the opera on our main stage, an excellent product. Those grand operas, in addition to the community operas that we do in the community, we give back the stories and words from which we have received those stories and words in reciprocal partnerships. We don't land in a community and say, this is the next community that we're going to work in. We build relationships, and we build those reciprocal partnerships. I want to read to you some of the other ways that organizations are doing this kind of leadership and not changing their place and mission, but really engaging in different ways as a cultural resource to the community in which they're in. Sandy Arnold from Yerba Buena. Their role is a civic asset. They are a practitioner, a platform, and a placemaker to a continuum of services specialized in health, immigration, education, and legal services through partnerships. It is for whom they do it and why they present what they present. Sarah Wilkes, she writes, this is the soul of the city. Through risk and relationship and culture of artistic experimentation and production. Eras are defined by making, and that in turn becomes our revolution. Howard Herring, New World Symphony, institutional leader to reimagine educational, artistic, and cultural role in our community. And Cookie Ruiz, Place, we are a place central hub to 50 nonprofits, Creative Austin, Lead Imagine Austin, and hubs to lifelong health, social well-being, and art. I could go on and on. There are several of these, but we are finally, I think, going beyond the building. And so I think that's what we are looking at. But what we're looking at is our mission and vision in our own companies. Why do we do the work we do? For whom are we doing it? And why is it important that we are a cultural asset, civic leader, cultural resource to the community we're in? I think that, for me, is the next big question as we continually evolve and look at our missions and visions and goals.
Okay. So I want to open up the floor again. One of the things I'm realizing as I'm sitting here is that maybe in a good way we borrowed a little bit of devised theater in that we really did use the surveys and really look at your own words and the ways that you are describing the work that you're doing. And you can hear how much we are really using that as the lead, really coming from the comments and the way that you framed and shaped your thinking around this work. And so I appreciate that, and I hope that means we will end with good performance quality and very authentic kinds of comments. So that was a great discussion that started us off on the first question, and Sarah's raised. Sandra, I'm going to keep doing that. I've done it now. We have Sarah, and we have Sandra, and Sandy, and I'm going to keep doing that. I was doing that without your faces, unfortunately, at home. So I just, you really sort of looked at what we bring to the civic table, and really in your story really talked about holding on to remembering, no matter how we're defining in what words, the meaningful part is to bring the art, the creative practice to that table. And I think as you were talking about mission, I was thinking a lot about that there is work to really thinking about mission in terms of what do we do and for whom. But this work of integrating a concept of your civic role is a little bit more like, the sort of what business are we in question. It's really like we're not just trains, we're in the transportation business. And really, it's really how you come to understand the work in the community that comes through, as I heard you define and speak about others. So thoughts about mission and about place and about that relationship? Great, Carlton's going to lead off.
Yeah, I would just add, this is Carlton Turner from Alternate Roots. The idea of who we do it for. I would like to add who we do it with. And why with them particularly, rather than for, and what is the balance of power in those relationships when we talk about doing deeply engaged community cultural work with the transition and transformation and the headwinds of what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Got Michael and then Colleen.
Just a quick note. Michael Orlov, National Endowment for the Arts. In reading this question initially, the one omission was, is it in your mission? I think for a lot of organizations, perhaps this wave, this new definition has made organizations rethink, but perhaps 5 years ago it wasn't in their mission. So I just wanted to make sure it was added to that question. Is it actually in your mission? Is it in your philosophy? Is this something you want to participate in?
Great. There were years when we were starting Animating Democracy that we were looking at practices we were looking at practices in animating democracy way back in the 1996, 99, looking at museums. And there were a lot of museums that were really well known for doing these great work in this intersection of arts and civic engagement, but it was always only as deep as the curator at the time. And when that curator moved on, the institutional practice really hadn't changed at all. And so I think you're really asking, you're pointing out a big question. Colleen?
Sandra's comments reminds me of how do leaders learn? How do boards learn? So many of these organizations are run by boards who select a leader that you hope the leader carries these principles forward. But how does leadership learn? And I would say two organizations, both the Association of Performing Arts Presenters and NPN, has actually done a lot in this arena of learning and teaching of existing leaders and then bringing new leaders to the field. And I would also pay a compliment to the Houston Grand Opera. I had a chance to see Cruza, and it was fabulous, and it was done by our own Arizona Opera. And the night I went, it was filled with Latino people. And I went, and for those of you who don't know, it's the first mariachi opera. It was stunning, but I was more stunned by the audience. And I stayed for the talk back, and I saw many of my donors and my audience members there, and we talked about it. And it was really the first time that it had happened at the opera, with, you know, all due respect. And I think that with Ryan Taylor being the new GM, it has made a difference.
And part of the reason it's made a difference is partnership, and it's a partnership with Univision. So this work doesn't happen solo.
It's great to bring that up and bring up partners. It's great to bring that up and partners. So I've got Claudia, MK, and then Sarah. Sandra, do you want to, or unless you need to really go right back. Yeah.
I just want to add, with Cruzar la Cara de la Luna, the first mariachi opera, that was a commission through HGO Co. That is done through the company. So, and that has been to Paris, Chicago, San Diego, Arizona. It is, all of these stories, even though they are developed in Houston, are universal in aspect that we are telling stories of people. So just wanted to add that in.
Claudia. This is Claudia from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So in Ashland, we do 3 or 4 large community collaborative artistic events. And the biggest lesson I've learned in the last couple of years is that it's actually the planning process of those events that have the most impact for the community. One of the strengths of these events is that the Oregon Shakespeare Festival is not the leader on 2 of them. They're being produced by the school district and the Chamber of Commerce and the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So we, of course, you know, I'm curating the shows, so I'm pretty heavily involved. But the content of those shows is being led by the community, and they have a huge amount of ownership over them, which allows them to have more impact.
MK Wegman with the National Performance Network, Visual Artists Network. You can hear that we're trying to brand the relatively new inclusion of our Visual Artists Network. I want to bring up a couple of hard issues, because for me there is a lot of the evocation in this conversation, the community-based arts movement, which many of us have been engaged in since forever, actually. And the struggles to validate that idea of community-based arts organizations and the role that they played, and that they were actually credible arts organizations, not just social service entities, because they were embedded in communities. And it was often a euphemism for organizations of color. They were community arts organizations, and then the rest of us were something else, fine arts organizations. And you know, is this movement a co-optation of those ideas, or is it a genuine, I guess, a genuine acknowledgement that artists and creative people are embedded and are part of every community that exists, whether that be a Native American reservation, whether it be a housing project, whether it be an undocumented immigrant community. How are these practices serving the whole of our country, and not just moving resources into an arena, co-opting ideas that have been embedded in many, many organizations and artists for a long, long time?
Great, thank you. Mario, and then you still want to get in, and Mitch?
Sure, just a couple of things. Colleen, Mario Garcia Durham, APAP.
Thank you.
Colleen mentioned how do leaders learn. I agree, but I look at the success of a program on how well we all learn from the program. And hearing the discussion and the fantastic examples from Yerba Buena and on the boards, I recognize all of these examples as leading organizations, but I think if we're looking at perhaps an issue of shared knowledge and shared practice, we cannot forget the fact of the burden of work. The vast majority of organizations, arts organizations, are small and mid-sized organizations. And hearing about going outside of their buildings, hear about these other projects that these immensely successful organizations are doing is all great. But the challenge I see is to see how we can translate that work into the very small and mid-sized organizations that may not have the resources or the staff to look outside of their own buildings, look outside of their own missions to do this very alluring work that's often tied to additional funding.
I've got Mitch and Colleen, and then we're going to have to move to our last presentation.
So Mitch Menchaca with Chorus America, and I have the and $80,000. So how can we celebrate community bands, community choruses, community theater? Because the conversations around this table are very big budgeted, big city conversation. So to Mario's point, how can we help the small, mid-size, or should we be helping, or are they actually doing this work? And if they are, how can we be celebrating through these processes those folks who it's volunteer, not professional, not big scope? So I just bring up the avocational artists that are not represented around this table.
It's a really great point to bring up. So the participatory arts, the informal arts that are happening everywhere, and how it really does connect to this notion of place and creativity. Colleen, last comment.
I just wanted to underscore something that Claudia had said. One of the things that we do, whether we are working with artists, with businesses, with communities, is ask 3 questions. What do you want? What do we want? And then what do we want together? And that begins the framework. That we don't have a single step taken until we've sat at a table and had those discussions. And then predicated on those discussions, we realize where the program, where the effort should lie. Because and I will give an example of working with the community of Guadalupe, who came and said, what we'd really like to do is reactualize our La Pastorela. So we brought in an artist from San Francisco, Rodrigo Duarte Clark, to help that happen. And then the second year it happened, we decided what we'd do is give some support. And then the third year, we actually helped the community to fund the project and to figure out how we could go on without us. So not every engagement is something that's like, oh, this is ours, we have to own it, we have to do it. But rather in the partnership, where does it best lie and where can it best live when we continue to move forward?
Thank you. That really gives me the impression to not think of this just as a wheel with spokes and one hub all the time, that the form is really quite different than that. So with that, I'm going to welcome up Howard Herring to share with us the summary around comments around events and how temporary, that's air quotes, performance events can transform and be lasting. Thank you.
So let me start by just quickly about New World Symphony, because it makes a difference as I present this. We're an orchestral academy. Our players come to us on 3-year fellowships. They have to have an undergraduate. The majority have a master's. They move from us on into their professional lives. And so our job is to build leaders, is to not take wonderful players, but make them leaders and get them ready for robust careers. You'll see how that applies in just a moment. So Barbara is talking about big but often, but not often. Big but not often, was I think the phrase that you used. And then if you think about transforming and lasting, it's got to be maybe not often, but it's got to be sticky. So let's kind of think of that as we move through here. We got to think beyond the building. That's a challenge for New World because we've spent the last 10 years putting a building together, and so I'm going to have to force myself out of that, but I'll do my best. So let's start with the comments of all of us around the room. I'm going to kind of follow Sandra's lead here and just give you back some of the language that you used. Artistic statements can transform physical spaces. The requirement is to reimagine the space. So reimagining the space is critical. Well-crafted, intentional artistic statement might inspire future action in a chosen place. This could be the start of something good, right? Temporary could become permanent. Even places with negative history can become creative places. Prisons was used as an extreme example, but reviving an abandoned neighborhood is less dramatic, but certainly meaningful. The total experience leaves its mark. We think a lot at New World about experience. For example, an informal presentation without the fourth wall, the participation of the audience, that can be quite powerful. Artistic expression can work with the space and become a mutual construction. Now that's really fascinating to me because that's what we are doing at New World. The mutual construction animates the civic and the physical space. Community-based work can integrate content, cultural traditions of neighborhoods and venues. If the place is an essential part of the total experience, it can make for powerful storytelling. Community collaborative projects in public spaces, not traditional venues, allow people from different backgrounds to mix and to find commonalities. This reconnects the institution with their community and the history of that local space. And last of all, this work should be part of a larger strategy developed by artists, arts institutions, and the community. We've heard that already, but I think a one-off is not enough. You got to be ready to keep going. So let me kind of summarize from the New World perspective. Miami's on very much on the rise, and we get written about all the time. There's been $1 billion of public-private investment in arts facilities in this city in the last 10 years. The Adrian Arts Center, New World Symphony, our new building, New World Center is what we call it. There's a new art museum, the Science Museum is right behind it. South Dade Cultural Center, there's a bunch of renovation that's happened. So we've done our work as far as making these buildings, but I have spent a lot of time reading Jane Jacobs lately because I'm trying to understand what's going on in terms of culture and in terms of civic engagement. And in The Death and Life of Great American Cities, she talks about, she breaks cities down into three sections. The neighborhood, the district, she says districts are sort of 80 to 100,000, maybe 120,000 people, and the city as a whole. And a city begins to mature when people from all parts of the city come together around a project for the civic good. Now that's happened in Miami in the last 10 years, and it has had its effect. But what intrigues me about this conversation today, this is Jane Jacobs writing in the 1950s and the 60s. Where we are right now is that I think that while we're still building buildings, the placemaking that we're talking about today is the creative expression of what she was describing, this business of coming together for the civic good. It's a physical space, you deliver the artistic content, we know that there are many variables there. But at the heart of it all is transformation. So I want to break down into categories the transformations as I understand them. First of all, there's transformation of the audience. Reimagined spaces inspire the audience and they give them unexpected access. This is most dramatic in places with negative histories, and if the placemaking performance or presentation is part of a larger strategy, audience members realize they can return for more. That is certainly happening in our case. There's the transformation of the content. The place can influence the essence of the artistic content, and the physical space as a medium can change the nature of the expression. There's transformation of the space. Performances can animate civic space, we know that for sure. The space takes on a new meaning for audiences, especially for new audiences and for the community. There's the transformation of the institution. Institutions gain a new position of leadership in the community. They expand media coverage of themselves. They attract new funders who are excited about the innovation and the reaching out to the community, and they win new ticket buyers. And last of all, there's the transformation of the community. Access to artistic expression makes the community livelier, richer, more animated. The stature of the artistic offerings gives the community pride and ultimately ownership of the art form, the artists, and the presenting or producing institution. Art and arts institutions are recognized as catalysts and leaders. There's an increased economic activity in the neighborhood for sure, and perhaps even in the district and the city, and the brand of the city can be enhanced locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. That's the summary.
Howard, thank you so much. The beginnings of thinking about this notion of what happens outside of that moment of that temporary audience encounter, what really builds that as lasting value or as value in communities. And again, I know that this is a rich area. One of the things that I was thinking about really coming from the last conversation was MK's charge that that we need to think about to what degree this is, there's co-opting happening. I think I want to also suggest as we get into the conversation that other things could be in that mix besides that. In other words, could be evolution, it could be integration, it could be that many of the service organizations and our performing arts organizations, whether presenting or theater, opera, dance, have been evolving practice as cultural institutions. And some of that we see here at the table in really leadership organizations that are doing things in completely new ways, talking about seeing themselves in new ways. And so we see that here. Many presenting organizations learned their community practice through the community-based artists that were touring and moving through. That practice has been evolving a great deal for Colleen to describe the projects that she has been doing. The idea of connecting the informal arts to our presenting and performing is new. Little League got it a long time ago in baseball, but we have taken a long time to do that for some reason. I think that the opportunity here is, as we look forward, to look at how these ideas are connecting to each other and perhaps informing one another. That's what I love about this conversation so far. Coming back, just to give you a minute to put your ideas in place. What haven't we said yet about events that you want to put on the table? What did Howard point out that you really want to build on?
This is Mark from Opera America. I'm curious to know about evaluation of these efforts. How these goals are soft, they're intangible. How does one know, an artist or an organization know, when engagement has been beneficial in a reciprocal way?
Great.
Can I answer that directly? So, Mark,
this is Howard.
Yeah, Howard Herring from New World. One of the ways first of all, we put numbers to it. We watch very carefully. Last year we were in the Lincoln Theater, which we renovated 27 years ago. Last year we were in that space. We had 35,000 people. We're now up to 100,000 people a year in our new space with only 10 additional concerts. There's a lot of reasons for that. But the more important measure for us is what the audience is telling us. We survey relentlessly. We're trying to get to this business of intrinsic impact. Alan Brown is helping us do that. It's emotional resonance, it's aesthetic growth, it's intellectual stimulation. If you can begin to understand what your audience is, what's happening to them, then it makes an incredible difference in terms of forward motion.
I certainly agree with what you've talked about there. I'm looking for a deeper level of the resonance in the community, not the resonance around your performance or the way your performance creates meaning for the individual, but for the work that is more community-based. And for me, that doesn't mean condominium construction or restaurant openings, but it is about a deeper sense of, to borrow on Roberta's word, of belonging in the community, belonging in your art form. How do we know about that?
That's great. Claudia, I think there's something else.
Yeah, this is Claudia from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So we just recently did a big Southern Oregon Pride show, and there's a big parade, and we had an actual gay wedding in the show, and lots of dancing, and it was really entertaining. One of the things I wanted to make sure we talked about, though, were the ancillary events and the positive effects from those ancillary events to the events that they're doing. So obviously, Southern Oregon Pride brings in a lot of LGBTQ community to come into our community, so they're spending money, so that's added value. It gives all of our local groups like Lotus Rising Project, youth groups, chances to know that they are accepted within the community. But 6 months earlier, that group, they make sure that there's a parade entry in the 4th of July parade. That's the Southern Oregon Pride. And they've been doing that for years to promote that show. They go into the other parades which were not accessible. They were told you cannot be in this parade, and then the community had to have a conversation and go, wait a second, why wouldn't we want them in the parade? We do want them in the parade, which meant that it also had a positive effect for the event itself when it happened in October. I don't know if that's a way of measuring. A lot of the times these kinds of huge community-based positive effects, you know them because you're experiencing them. You know them because you can walk down the street and have conversations with people that you could never have in the past, and that you are more accepted into spaces that you weren't accepted in. Michael?
Yeah, Michael Orlov, National Endowment for the Arts. Again, like in question 2, I wanted to add a couple questions to the question. Okay. It's what we do. The definition of transform is, for me, something to perhaps throw out to the table. I think a lot of people get concerned when you start talking about transforming communities or transforming neighborhoods. Perhaps a community does not need transformation. I know there are certain cities, I think of right off the bat, New Orleans, that are struggling with transforming neighborhoods or communities that perhaps aren't interested in being transformed. So I just want to throw that out, the definition of transformation and how people actually define that. There are some negative connotations that could come when you start throwing out those words and phrases.
I want to appreciate that and also point out that sometimes when we talk about that with individuals, we're talking about, well, did a program for the homeless, an 8-week program after school, did that transform them? Well, do we have to look at whether or not that gave them a home? And do we oversell some of the kinds of promises that we make? So I want to come back and answer Mark's, but I've got Ashley and Sixto and MK on the table, and I'm looking, so please make sure I know. All right, and I'm going to go to, I'll need to do Teresa, and then I'll go to Mitch.
Okay, so I think for NET was over the MicroFest series, we looked at 4 communities around the country. And what was really helpful for us in terms of answering that question of impact was using the continuum of impact from animating democracy. So for me, the question goes to what is the artist's intention with the work? And what is the organizational or institutional intention with the work? And can you actually articulate, we are talking about healing, we are talking about political policy, we're talking about economic development, we're talking, like, can the organization and artist articulate it early on in the process? And I think that is one of those places where artists are, there's, especially on a grassroots level, you're doing the work, you're in community. And if I ask you, I have to like peel back the layers to get them to say, okay, this is really the intention is this, because we're still struggling as practitioners with what the language is. And the other thing I just want to plug as a note, in your list of transformation, it's audience, content, space, institution, community, and for me, where is the artist? And that we entering community and living in those communities are actually constantly evolving because we're responding and in direct relationship to the places where we live and the communities we engage with. And that piece of transformation also has to be taken into the picture, that we are evolving as we're understanding what we're doing in a place.
So I guess along that idea about artists, I'm sorry, this is Sixto Logan, University of Houston. Artist and I guess the understanding and acceptance of failure and how we actually are moving from that, because we talk about the success, but perhaps one of those moments what I've learned the most is when things didn't go well. and when we actually had the relationships within the partnerships and the community in order so that it was transparent enough to be called out on that and actually be an understanding that these things are where the miscommunication was, the misunderstanding is, and how are we as arts organizations who continue to have to put out these positive aspects, actually recognizing that how do we make clear where our those moments of failure and what are those moments of not necessarily failure, but how those are actually changed into opportunities.
MK Wegman, NPN Van. I'm hearkening back to Junebug Productions' Environmental Justice Project, which took place in the 1990s. And first of all, it culminated in a festival, so that was the temporary event. But it was actually 6 years of work commissioning new plays in partnership with community organizations, activists, and artists. And one of the partners was the Press Street neighborhood, which is a suburban community that was built on a closed landfill. And only after people bought homes, an African-American community bought homes and moved there, did they discover the toxicity in the soil that had not been remediated when that suburb was built. And only this year have the buyouts of the homes come from the federal government to redress that issue for those people. Now, I'm not saying that the project with Junebug led to the remediation, but that partnership helped empower that community. So when we're talking about impact and transformation, we can be talking about 20 years or 30 years. And so how do we address measurement and evaluation in our short-term 18-month cycles of, you've received funding, now prove to us that you have achieved something?
Mitch Menchaca with Chorus America. And what's great about this conversation right now is something that was addressed in the summary about doing this work and making sure that you are really fulfilling your mission versus funding models. A lot of these terms I'm hearing, I'm like, oh, you guys filling out your final reports now. You know, transformation, impact to community, measure. And I think that sometimes it can't be measured. It's just the work that you do. But if you are filling out a final report, you do have to put some measurements on there. So I think it's the balance between doing the good work and these funding programs that have come along with this new ideology.
Okay, so I have Ashley, Jamie, Teresa, and Colleen that all want to make comments. And Jesse, we got a lot of, all right. So we are getting to be a little short to stay on time. So I'm going to give us 5 minutes. It's going to shorten our break and our transfer to the next room. Be brief. And so I'm going with who's been on the table a lot. So I've got Ashley, Jamie, Teresa, Jesse. Mario's going to get the last word. Sorry.
I just want to, building on MK's example, so right now, Cornerstone Theater Company is going back to 10 communities where we've been visiting over the past 10 years. And in 2004, I was in a little town called Lost Hills. It was dirt roads. Michael can also attest to the images of this small town where there's no stoplight. There was a line in the play about, we really wish our streets were paved, and we wish we had a stoplight. So fast forward 10 years later, this summer we get there, it's a new, like the town looks completely different. And Augustine, who was in the show, comes up to me and says, do you see, we have a stoplight now, and our streets are paved, and it's because of you. And we're like, I don't know that Cornerstone did not come and pave your roads. Right. But it's because of the visibility piece. And so that's added this whole other layer in that community.
And we can begin to get to those things.
So I'll just do this quickly, and I'm happy to pick it up again later. I just want to pick up on Mitch's point, which is I think often we talk about measurement, evaluation, outcomes as if it's this extra thing that we have to do for funders. And we're at ArtPlace trying to spend some time getting over that. And we provide project-based funding. So the question we ask instead is, what are you trying to do with this project, and how are you going to know if you've done it? Right? Can you stop? So I think we sometimes need to push ourselves on why we're measuring, what it is that we're trying to do. And if those two things aren't related, to Colleen's point, at the beginning you need to say, what are you trying to do? What am I trying to do? What are we trying to do? And tie it, root it firmly in that. So.
And I just want to add to that the time in that conversation to describe what people see as the current conditions that you hope to change is one of the grounding points for being able to go back and look at what has changed. Okay, so, sorry. It goes off when you guys talk and I'm not realizing that. Teresa, please.
Teresa from TCG. I'm interested in and have been thinking a lot about this idea of temporary versus permanent, and I think when we think about things that are permanent and lasting, we think about buildings or constitutional laws or sculptures, monuments, and actually and this is what's being said around the table, in so much of what we do in the performing arts, the events are look temporary because they come and go, but in fact there is an invisible architecture that's built from them, and a lot of it happens in the stories that people tell each other. I think there's a exponentiality of storytelling in the performing arts where the people who experience it go and tell stories about what they saw, the artists who participated tell stories. So I think part of the challenge we have is just to start seeing the evidence that's not the automatically visible evidence, the sort of undercurrent or the under the radar things that are happening and that happen laterally through time and through through centuries. So thank you.
I'm going to come to Jesse.
I just wanted to mention a couple of orchestra projects that I think exemplify a lot of what Howard was talking about. One in Cincinnati, where the orchestra, as part of a movement in the city to rejuvenate the Over the Rhine neighborhood, over 2 years did events in the park in front of their concert hall called the Music Hall. And the park was renovated. The concerts each had about 12,000 people. The art was the orchestra playing together with newly created video images that were created by a local design company with a community group that worked with the designers around the relationship between the music and the images. And when I went to one of the performances, the chairman of the board was telling me how great this was for the community. And I said, well, what do you mean? What's been the impact of what you've done here for the community besides the 12,000 people showing up? And he said, the 12,000 people showing up. This is a park where people never used to go. And the presence of the orchestra in these events has been instrumental in establishing the idea that this is, in fact, a place where people can and should go.
Thank you. Victoria.
Just very briefly. Response to Jamie, I hear what you're saying, but I feel like some of the pushback you'll get regarding what you're doing, what you're trying to do, is I just want to recognize there is a legitimacy to not knowing. That's critical in our work, and so that's what I feel some of the pushback is.
Great.
And like a respect for the not know. I don't know where this is leading. I don't know where it's going to go. I know I'm filling out a grant application. I just don't know where this is going, and a respect for that as part of the process. I just wanted to throw that out. Secondly, I do take issue, or I'm questioning the issue, temporary. I don't know any performing arts pieces that aren't temporary. Maybe Cats, you know. But anyway,
standing for Cats. Come on.
Exactly. But seriously, I think that it's a pejorative. It has a pejorative association that if we're looking to address this, you know, we're doing that as a temporary. It's like, well, what does that really mean? Let's dig in. Is that more accessible? Is it free? What does that mean, temporary? I think we need to dig into that a little.
All right, and I think we've begun that. So I have a couple of housekeeping things, the most important of which is to welcome Michael Rowe to the table. Hey. Yeah, we're glad to have you. So you're going to learn that you'll, push the button to stay on, and we'll make sure that you get a chance to really be on the table as we come back from our small groups. I just want to say that I think that one of the things that I'm hearing is this notion of de-marginalizing community arts and community arts practice. And I think that there's a parallel within many cultural organizations, presenting organizations, and producing organizations, where education and audience folks and the combination of those activities where the staff were sort of connected to the community, that was marginalized within those organizations. And we're beginning to see what we see in the practice at an institutional level is a very different look also at that work within the institution, so that it becomes the program that Sandra is leading. as opposed to, somewhere in the middle of the education department over there. And so those are all important. So we are about to break into small groups. For those of you online, that means that at 10:45, you'll have a chance to delve into these conversations via Twitter in 140 characters or less. If for each comment, we will learn from you about how to be brief. And Vijay Matthew will be helping to direct traffic there. Pardon? The hashtag perform place. Hashtag perform place. And that'll link you into the conversation, and we'll be seeing some of that here.